Welcome to this video featuring the Mini Sequesizer, the 18 HP skiff-friendly mono voice synth and sequencer combo module by Division 6. In this video, we'll do a full walkthrough of the synthesizer voice and a deep dive into all the functions of this surprisingly deep sequencer, followed by some patch tips, a couple little jams, and a giveaway of this module at the end of the video. Be sure to stick around to the end. Though it looks fairly simple and rudimentary, it's actually a very powerful module sure to find a place in all your patches, whether it be a rhythm voice, some sound effects, a chippy lead, easy drum ratchet triggering, or anything else you could think of. But first, let's get to know all the knobs, buttons, inputs, and outputs of the module. Since this module is split into two halves, we're going to start with the synthesizer and then we'll jump over to the sequencer afterwards. The synthesizer is a pretty basic mono voice synth with two LFOs that are internally routed to give you interesting effects, and there's this little sample and hold, and we have a filter. To start, we have this gate button here, which gates our VCA envelope. But instead of holding this the whole time, I'm just going to do it with the sequencer. So starting from left to right, we have our tune knob, which is our coarse tune, and this is quantized, you'll notice. And it can go pretty low. This is our lowest note. And it could go very, very high, even with receiving no voltage in the CV. So you could fit in any range you want without any trouble. And the tuning is a little off, we have this fine tune knob here to get you right into that sweet spot. We then have our shape knob here, which controls the shape of our oscillator. Now this is also quantized and does not crossfade between the waveforms. So we start with a very wide pulse wave, and it gets more and more narrow as we go. And there are 4 different pulse waves. And then we have our saw wave, or ramp up wave, and a triangle wave. And these are nice basic waveforms that don't crossfade between, which enables you to get that kind of digital chippy sound. We then have our glide, which is basically your portamento, your slew to the notes. And it could get really crazy when all the way up. It's really, really slow. So most usable levels are at, 1 notch up from 0. And we'll get into that a little bit later. We then have our LFO1 and LFO2. Now these are identical LFOs, except their rates are a little bit different. And each has independent shape, which follows the shape of our oscillator, as far as the pulse waves, the ramp up, and the triangle. Now, we don't have any LFO outputs. They're both internally routed to the VCA or the VCO. Now, how the LFO works is you see 2 plus on this side and 1 plus on this side. This is where if we go counterclockwise past noon, LFO1 takes the lead and has more of an effect on it. So it's basically twice as powerful as LFO2. And the opposite happens with it fully clockwise, or as we go clockwise. So we get here, we could get just LFO2, and if we go here, we get just LFO1. And the same thing happens with the VCA. It applies both negative and positive voltage of the LFO to the VCA, causing it to open and close, so you get a little bit of volume reduction, but nothing you can't gain later. So we have the combination of the 2 LFOs in here to give us much more dynamic results. And at exactly noon, they disable. Now this brings us to our attack and release, which are the attack and release of our gate. So if I turn this all the way down, we're only going to get those notes on a high gate. Turn the attack up, we get it fading in. Turn the release up, we get a nice ring out. That goes pretty long. And same with the attack. So we get a nice good time with that for the ASR envelope. And then we have our filter, which is just a low pass filter with not really resonance, but gives us a nice filter to cut out those harmonics if we want. And then last over here, we have the sample and hold. Now the sample and hold disables any CV input, so it's not receiving any notes, but instead samples our notes from LFO2. LFO1 acts as our sample and hold rate. And this shape is disabled, but this shape is not. So you get nice little pseudo sequences with certain spots, and you'll hit weird sweet spots where you'll notice it's doing something weird, like the note's not going all the way up. It's just found a nice harmony in itself that it's kind of making it a sequence instead of just random sample and hold. And that's the sample and hold. Now here's a quick little jam using it. I'll get into quickly the CV inputs here. Now I mentioned the volt per octave input here, and then we also have our gate input, which is the same as pressing this trigger to engage our envelope. Then we have CV control over all these knobs except for the filter, sadly. Now the CV responds only to positive voltage. If you feed it negative voltage, it's going to do weird things, which I'm definitely going to show you. So I'm going to patch into the shape, and right now I'm feeding it 0 volts, which is basically putting our knob fully counterclockwise. Now note that all the knobs, when the CV is input, the knobs are disabled completely. So if you want it at center for, say, the LFO for it to be off, you can't give it 0 volts, you have to actually give it 2.5 volts. For this example, I'm going to plug into the shape. So obviously, 0 to 5 volts works to scan through our waveforms. But now, when I feed it negative voltage, notice really weird stuff starts happening, and it always affects the pitch. So if you ever want weird pitch stuff to happen, more inconsistent notes or something like that, throw it some negative voltage every once in a while. And the same thing goes for all the CV inputs. And note, when I feed it the negative voltage, the rate there feeds off of our LFO rate, even though these are off. So weird stuff happens with negative voltage. I'm not going to go through all the different inputs, but basically all of them except 0 to 5 volts, and the knobs are disabled when you patch in. And that is the synthesizer. And now let's dive into the sequencer. What's the first thing we want to know with the sequencer? How to program it. So first I'll walk through that, and then we'll go into more detail of all the features of the sequencer. First I want to say I love the sequencer, how it programs. It's really easy and intuitive. It plays like a pocket operator if they had a keyboard on them. Right now this is in ready mode to play, if we hit the run button. Now note when we're in the play mode here, or the ready mode, when it's ready to run, we can play the keyboard like a normal keyboard, and it won't disrupt our sequence at all. So we have to get it into program mode, which we just hit the reset button. And when it's blinking, it means it's ready, and we just hit it again until it's solid. And we hear it because it's connected to the synthesizer here, and it's internally routed with the gate and the CV. So we can play any note, and we get that in our synth, which is really nice internal routing. So to start, we just program our notes. We have our octaves here, and we have C0 all the way up to C5, and everything in between. So to program our notes, we just press the note. But to get different gates, there's no gate knob or anything like that. We just hit the button multiple times to get the different settings. Then we have 16 different gate settings to choose from. The first gate length follows our clock input, so it's whatever our clock gate is. Then we press it again, we could see we're at number 2 now, and it plays it for a shorter amount of time, indicating how long the gate is going to be playing. So on the second, it is quarter. Third, it's a third. Fourth, it's a half. 5 is 2/3. 6 is 3/4. And 7 is a full note. But note that the gate does drop ever so slightly right at the end of the note. So you can't get a full tie between the notes, but you get really close. Now 8 is where it starts to get interesting. It's a quarter, but it's the second quarter of that clock beat. 9 gives us the third quarter of that clock beat, and 10 gives us the fourth quarter. 11 gives us the second third, and 12 gives us the third third. 13 gives us the second half, and now it gets really fun. We get some ratchets. We get double ratchet, triple, and quadruple. So it's really easy to program ratchets in to our sequence. And notice it goes full gate again when I get back to that one. So I'm going to program my notes in here. And to program a rest, we simply just hit the rest button on that step. And then you also see there is a slur, where we could add a slur by holding the rest button and clicking our step. Now what that does is it changes our note, but it does not actually fire our gate when the sequence is running. So if you have a longer release time, it's a nice way to slur those notes together. Okay, I'm on the 9th step now, and say I want an 8-step sequence. What I do is use the loop button here. I'm going to put a loop on the 9th step that disables that step, and when it hits that, it goes back to 1. So now we have an 8-step sequence. Now let's listen to our sequence. I'm just going to reset it until it gets back to 1 and is blinking, and hit run. And that is the basics of programming a sequence. Now this stores more than just one sequence in here. We could store up to 7 sequences and 5 songs, as it shows here on the keyboard. To get into this select mode, all we do is press both octave buttons. Now you see we are in the sequence select mode, or we could just click over to the song and we get into the song select mode. And right now we're on sequence 1, and we can jump to any sequence here, and then jump out of that mode by pressing both octaves again, and we have our other sequence. To clear a sequence or a song, all we do is hold the sequence that we want to clear, and then we hold the reset button. And you see that the LEDs flash there. That's how we know it reset. So now we go back to our sequence, and it's cleared out. And we can also sequence this with auto advance mode, where each time we press a note, it'll auto advance to the next step. So to go into auto advance mode, we just hold the program and tap auto advance. And we saw 16 blinked twice. Now it'll stay in auto advance mode when we're programming until we hit the run button again. So now when we go into our program, we can play a note, and it's auto advancing. And we could put rests, loops, or steps in. And we see it stops on step 16 until we reset. So now let's run, and it'll disable the auto advance, but we can listen to it. And that is auto advance sequencing. And now we'll look at song mode and making songs. Let's go into our sequence song select by hitting both octave up and octave down at the same time. And right now you can see I have a song selected, or we could select a sequence. So I have a sequence programmed in 1 and 2 here. So say I want to go back and forth. What I do is I pick my song and then I want to record. So I hit the program button and this gives us to our record mode. And right now I have sequence 1 programmed into step 1 in the song. I could change that to any sequence here. I'm going to leave it at 1 for now. And then we could go to the next step. And you see I have sequence 2 stored here. So I'm going to do that. 3, I'm going to go 1 3 times in a row. And then we'll do 2. And then we'll stop it there. So we have to hit our loop. Otherwise, we go to all 16 steps, where we could have 16 sequences stored for our song out of our 7 sequences in the memory. So now that we have this stored, let's reset here and let's play it. You see it's not stepping across normally, it's showing what section we are in our song. And now note when we get out of our song select mode with our song selected, it will still play our song, but it steps normally. And I believe you could still do the transposing. Yes, we could still live transpose everything, and we could still live edit. And that is song mode. Now you notice there's not a tempo knob on here or anything like that, but it does say tempo right here. To change the tempo or our internal clock, what we do is, when running the sequence, we just tap the step up and down buttons. Step forward slows down our sequence, and step back speeds it up. And it speeds it up by about 10 beats per minute in the sweet spot range when you're not using crazy fast or crazy slow clocks. And it could go as slow as 10 beats per minute. To as fast as 8,000 beats per minute. But the sequencer works best when you use an external clock. So to quickly show how the clock works, I'm just going to plug a clock in from Pamela's new workout. So as soon as the sequencer received an external clock, it totally cuts out the internal clock, and that is gone until we reset. Which, a quick way to reset the module, if you ever get lost in a setting or don't know what happened, all we do is just hold our program button for like 2 or 3 seconds. And we're reset. So I'm plugging in a clock from Pam's here. And we'll see we're ready to sequence. And it hasn't received any clock yet, so it's still on the internal clock. And then it's just going to play on that internal clock until it receives our external clock. So I'm just going to send it right now and stop it. And now I'm going to get the sequence ready. And then I hit it into run mode. And now as soon as it gets that first click, it's going to fire our first step of the sequence. And that's the clock in. Then we have our CV out, which is our volt per octave CV output, which is internally routed to the CV in of the synthesizer. And we have our gate out, which is internally routed to the gate in of the synthesizer. And these work just as any other CV or gate would on any other sequencer. Now notice we have a little trim pot here that's visible from the front to easily calibrate our sequencer. To do this, if you don't have a voltmeter or anything like that, what you do is tune your bass note to the lowest note on our sequencer here. And then we're going to jump up to the highest octave and play that note and adjust our trimmer until we hit the right note. And that's it. That's how you calibrate it pretty quickly and easily. And we also have the XP input and XP output, which outputs or receives a trigger to tell it when to start or when it's reached the end of the sequence. And it's internally routed in here, so when it reaches step 16, the XP out hits the XP in, bringing it back to step 1. using the XP, which is short for the expansion, or you could use another module as an expansion of your sequence. What we have is two independent sequencers that daisy chain, where when one finishes, the next plays, and when that finishes, the other one plays. Now I have two sequences programmed in here. And then I have this sequence. And we're going to link them together. So it's sort of a nice call and respond musical device that you could use. So to do this, we're going to patch this XP out into this XP in, and we're going to patch this XP out into this XP in. And now note, I have the same clock rate coming into both, but you could change it up so one runs slower or faster than the other one. Now we hit run on the sequence we want to start. So it's ready now, and I'm just going to hit run. Great. So we have a 32-step sequence call and respond with the synthesizers. Now these are internally routed, but we could route the CV to different oscillators, or we could use a CV mixer to mix the volt per octave outputs together and use that for a single oscillator, and do the same thing for the gates. Now the one last output that I didn't mention yet is the accent. Now we can sequence accent triggers or gates to our accent output within each step. All we do is when we're sequencing the step, is on that step, we press the accent button, and there are 3 different modes for the accent. The first mode, the LED stays on, and with this, the accent stays on for the entirety of that step. The second accent mode is on with a drop at the end. So it's similar to our number 7 gate length. And then the third accent is a gate follow, which follows the gate of whatever our note does. So if we have a triplet, ratchet, or whatever it is, it's going to follow that. So we could pretty much program the accent to do any kind of gates we want. Now we can live transpose our sequence by pressing the program button and then pressing the loop or live transpose button. The first mode transposes our root key from the bottom. The second mode transposes it from the middle of the keyboard. And the third mode transposes it from the top of the keyboard. And it easily shows us where our root note is, so we could easily transpose it back to our starting point. We can also live edit our sequence using the same function of pressing the program button and then pressing live edit. And now we can live edit our notes. And that's a nice way to add some variation to your sequence while it's running. And that is the sequencer, and thus the full Mini Sequesizer. I have a few additional patch tips here, as well as some giveaway information at the end of the video. Now if you notice, the sequencer doesn't have a slew function, but we can utilize the accent output here and the glide input of the synthesizer to create a slew-like function between certain notes. It does work best when you use an external attenuator, but for the start, I'm just going to plug straight from the accent into the glide. Actually, first, we'll just listen to the sequence. Great, and I had some accents already programmed in here, and we're going to plug that accent into the glide input here. So every time there's an accent, it's going to turn our knob fully clockwise with that full high gate, which is why we want an attenuator in here as well. But for the start, I'll just show it with this and we'll hear those really wide swings. But first, to mention how to program it, basically you accent both of the notes you want to slew between with the first press of the accent button, which gives you a full gate that just drops off a little bit at the end. So we're basically tying the two gates together, leaving that glide open in between the notes. Now let's hear that sequence with the crazy high glide. So we can barely hear the note changes. Though it is slowing, it is doing it too slow. So we're going to plug into an external attenuator. I'm just using Carve right now. And I'm going to plug that output into the glide. And now I'm attenuating it to almost 0, like very, very low. And that's going to slew the smaller note changes that are only like a third apart. And now let's listen to our sequence. And that is how we get a nice slewed sequence with the Mini Sequesizer. And to extend the sequence even more, I'm going to use 2 sequencizers. And I'm going to use the first one to clock the second one at an irregular rate using the accent output. So I'm going to plug our clock into this input. And I'm going to plug this accent out of the first to the clock in of the second. So now every time we hit an accent note, we're going to fire off this clock. Now it's important to note when programming that we have the third press of the accent, 1, 2, 3, which follows the gate of our note. Because if we use the first setting, the gate remains on the entire time, causing the clock in here to miss some. So I'll plug this output in, and let's hear our sequence. We have a nice irregular sequence that gives us 32 steps. And that is accent sequencing. And I have a neat little trick here with the LFO VCA that kind of causes chaos. Is I have an offset voltage and a sequential switch putting our position around here. And when the switch is off, it's sending us the 2.5 volts needed to set us at 0 when we're not using it. So when I play this sequence now, we don't get any change. But I flick that switch, we get a cool little intermittent effect button. That's just one cool use for the LFO VCA input. Now let's just jam out a bit. And now it's time for the giveaway. To enter to win this Division 6 Mini Sequesizer, just post a comment on this video that says, "Sequesize me, Captain." And on June 6th, we'll pick a winner at random, and I'll announce it on my Instagram page. So go give me a follow over at Robots Are Red to make sure you catch if you're the winner. And that's it for this video on the Mini Sequesizer by Division 6. See you next time.